So now let's look at parathyroid hormone. Let me summarize the function of parathyroid hormone by a simple sentence. Parathyroid hormone hates phosphates, love calcium. So what it does is it will increase the body's blood calcium levels while decreasing blood phosphate levels. So when it comes to calcium, there are three forms of calcium in blood. The first one is bound to albumin. So when we take blood, there is 40% of calcium bound to albumin. Then there is calcium which is free but is complexed with negative ions such as phosphate ions. So they are not considered exactly free. And then we have the ionized calcium. Now these are what matters in this hormone, because the chief cells of the parathyroid gland, will come to that, detects levels of ionized calcium. That is what regulates the release of parathyroid hormone. Now let's look at the parathyroid glands. So the parathyroid glands, there are 4, are located on the posterior aspect of the thyroid gland. There are 2 superior and 2 inferior. Now let's take a look at these chief cells of the parathyroid gland. So first of all, they will detect changes in calcium, in ionized calcium. So whenever the calcium that they love goes down, or if the phosphates that they hate goes up, or if there is low levels of 1,25 dihydroxy cholecalciferol. This is a derivative of vitamin D. If this is also low, it will be detected by these chief cells, and these chief cells will then secrete parathyroid hormone. Now let's take a look at the function of parathyroid hormone in our body. It acts on the kidney and the bones. So here's where we will discuss the kidney, and here's where we will discuss the bones. I will talk about the function of tubular cells first. And in this case, what happens is there is going to be parathyroid hormone binding to these receptors, G stimulatory receptors, which will cause an activation of adenyl cyclase. And this will cause conversion of ATP to CAMP. Now this pathway has been discussed in the topic ADH. You can check that video out. Now CAMP will be high in these tubular cells. And what happens is, if there's too much CAMP, this can be detected in urine. And this is an indicator of parathyroid hormone function on tubular cells. Now what happens when CAMP does its work? It will cause an increase in calcium reabsorption from the distal convoluted tubules. Now the calcium reabsorption occurs in the distal convoluted tubules. Now let's look at what happens to the phosphates. I told you parathyroid hormone hates phosphates. It doesn't have any option over here. We will discuss this, because in the bone, once the collagen is broken down, parathyroid hormone will cause the release of phosphates and calcium into blood. So what it does is it tries to get it out of the body. And what it does is it stops the entry of phosphate ions in the proximal convoluted tubule. So it inhibits proximal convoluted tubule reabsorption of phosphate ions. Now, when we talk about the proximal convoluted tubule, there is one more function, which is synthesis of 1,25 dihydroxy cholecalciferol. This substance is produced in the proximal convoluted tubule. We will discuss that next. So now let's look at the second function, vitamin D. So UV will cause the synthesis of vitamin D in this pathway. In the melanocytes, those cells will convert 7D cholesterol to a molecule which is stored in the liver. It is called 25 hydroxy cholecalciferol. You can see there's only one OH group. Now this molecule will be sent to the kidneys, and when there is activation of those cells in the kidney by parathyroid hormone, an enzyme, very important enzyme called 1-alpha hydroxylase. So the PTH will activate this enzyme. it will add another OH group. It will form 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol. Dihydroxycholecalciferol. And that has two functions. It will go to the intestines and increase the absorption of calcium and phosphates. And it will go to the bones and it will act with the parathyroid hormone in this way. It cannot directly stimulate osteoclast cells. So what it does is, it stimulates osteoblasts and osteocytes. Osteocytes. These are immature cells, and they will produce this substance called rank L. It is called receptor activator of kappa B ligand. Receptor activator of NF kappa B ligand. And that is going to be secreted by these cells. So as you can see, there's a G stimulatory pathway. That means the same process as this. That will cause an increase in the production of these molecules. Now, they will go to the osteoclasts. If you don't know what osteoclasts are, these are modified macrophages. These are modified macrophages in the bone. And their function is bone resorption. They break down the bone. What they do is, they destroy the organic part, that is collagen. So in bone, we have collagen. And to that, we have the calcium and the phosphates attached. And there's another substance, it's called hydroxyproline, but that's not relevant. So what happens is, the macrophages will destroy the collagen. And remember, collagen type 1. So in bone, we have collagen type 1. And once the collagen is destroyed, the organic matter is destroyed, these calcium and the phosphates will be released into blood. Now, let's look at the relationship of parathyroid hormone to pH. So, when the pH is high, there will be an attraction. That means this is more basic. So, in basic conditions, the albumin loves to bind with the calcium. And this will decrease free ionized calcium, and that will cause a release of parathyroid hormone. Now, when there is low free calcium ions, what happens is, these patients will have cramps because you need calcium for proper muscle contraction. So there can be cramps, pain, paresthesias, that is tingling sensation in these areas. It can be called as pins and needles, and carpopedal spasms. So these muscles will spasm. Okay, that is involuntary contractions. So now, when the pH is low, the opposite happens. Albumin prefers not to bind with this calcium. So the free ionized calcium levels will go up, and the release of parathyroid hormone will be decreased. Now, please take note that even if albumin levels are really high, that alone does not cause parathyroid hormone release to increase. That is a wrong fact. It is the presence of free calcium that causes the parathyroid hormone release to increase. Now, let's take a look at two carcinomas. Carcinomas are epithelial cell cancers, and in this case, we look at lungs and renal carcinomas. So in these cells, they can release substances which do the same function as parathyroid hormone. So those are called parathyroid hormone related peptides, PTHRP. So that will cause bone resorption and increase blood calcium levels, which can be detected in blood tests. Now let's take a look at the relationship of magnesium to parathyroid hormone. So low serum magnesium will cause an increase in parathyroid secretion the same way that free calcium does, but very low serum magnesium. So it could be due to diarrhea, giving of aminoglycoside antibiotics, diuretics, alcohol abuse will cause magnesium levels to go down, and that will cause a decreased parathyroid hormone secretion. Now let's discuss the regulation, the feedback inhibition of parathyroid hormone synthesis. So as you can see, low levels of 1,25 dihydroxy cholecalcitriol. So that will cause the increase of parathyroid hormone and eventually lead to an increase in that molecule itself. When this is too high, this will go and inhibit these cells from releasing more parathyroid hormone.